Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on from where in the world you're joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the first in our 2022 series of Fundraising and Support for Development webinars. Fair to say we've been blown away by the interest and engagement in the series since we launched last year, and I'm delighted to say that today it continues in the same vein. I think we've over 300 of you in attendance. So thank you for giving us an hour of your time. I've no doubt our venerable panel will make it well worth your while. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Luke Selfall and I'm Managing Director at Oaks, and we work with sport for development organisations across the world, supporting with strategy, fundraising, sustainability and capacity building. And I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Now, since we last spoke, we launched our second annual Fundraising and Support for Development State of the Sector report. That launched in January. Hopefully a lot of you have already seen that. But the results of that report will kind of inform not only our discussion today, but the rest of the series throughout 2022 as well. Now, without giving too much away, please download the report. There were some really encouraging findings. To highlight just a few kind of illuminating stats, we had 53% of organisations we spoke to forecasted an increase in income this year, compared to only 25% of the equivalent last year. Almost 2/3 of those organisations forecasting an increase in income this year are expecting further increases next year as well, so the trend going in the right direction. 22% of organisations who we spoke to actually exceeded their fundraising target in the last financial year, and 35% of organisations actually beat their fundraising income target from the previous year. So lots of really good news stories within that. However, we're not getting carried away, because there was obviously still a lot of areas that represented cause for concern. So for instance, 37% of organisations we spoke to who reduced their fundraising expenditure this year, 71% of whom failed to meet their income targets for the year. At least 30% of organisations in the sector did not have a fundraising strategy in place. 42% of those we spoke to experienced income reduction and cited not having enough people with the right fundraising skills and experiences as the primary reason. And over half of the organisations who we spoke to were reliant on grants from trusts, foundations and institutions as their primary source of income. And it's that last point that will form the basis of today's discussion. So the problem statement, so to speak, is, do we need to? And if so, how do we reduce the sector's over-reliance on grants from trusts, foundations and institutions? So we'll explore the panel's overall reflections and inferences from the latest State of the Sector report findings, talk about how we can maximise our potential, both as individual organisations and as a sector in this seemingly fertile income area, try and get into some of the challenges that poses, though, that perceived over-reliance, what challenges that presents for us as organisations and a sector, and then talk through what we can do to de-risk and reduce that dependency. But before we go any further, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists. So I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, David.
Thanks, Luke, and thanks for having me here today. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people attending. Thank you also for the report. First of all, I think it was a phenomenal report. Loved it last year, love it this year. Look forward to it next year and the years to come, not to put too much pressure on you. My name's David Given-Hollander. I am a project manager and strategic lead for Sport for Development at the Swedish Postcode Foundation. Some of you might know who the Swedish Postcode Foundation is. For those of you who don't, we're a grant-making organization that supports projects that provide solutions to the challenges we face today. We work with human rights, we work with environmentalism, we work with culture, and we work with sport for social change. Since being founded in 2007, we've supported about 770 projects around the world with about 1.8 billion krona, which is about, I think, 150 million euro, if my conversion rate is right. But great to see you all. Looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you, David. Great to have you. Gary.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks to yourself and Oaks for the invitation to intervene as a panelist today. So a very warm welcome to all participants and to my fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Kerry McDonald, and I'm the Business Development and Fundraising Manager for Tefisa, which is the Association for International Sport for All. We have a vision for a better world through sport for all and a mission to lead the global sport for all movement. We typically do this across 4 main focus areas. Number 1 is advocating internationally for sport for all. Number 2, developing and coordinating programs and events. 3 is providing platforms for that really fundamental networking and experience exchange and sharing transfer. And number 4 is supporting the development of our members. We are a member-centric organisation as it stands. As of today, I believe we have about 380 members in 170 countries around the world, continuously growing. Every week we have new member applications coming in. And our members are a real eclectic mix of national Olympic committees, governments, municipalities, national sport for all umbrella organizations, international federations, universities, sport for all, or sport development, NGOs, grassroots sport organizations, etc. We also work alongside other change makers such as the IOC, the UN, UNESCO, WHO, the European Union, the African Union, and others. And we have our regional bodies where, of course, we're one organization. Our headquarters are here in Frankfurt, Germany. With so many members in so many countries, we really rely on these regional bodies to focus on the specific continental needs. So a brief overview, that's who TEFISA is. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, so you'll be giving us a truly global view today. Absolutely. Last but not least, Drew.
Luke, thank you so much. Thank you to the Oaks team for having me here. It's really a pleasure. I have a passion for the sport for development sector, and just you all creating the purview across the sector that you've been able to is a true asset to all of us. So thank you all, and very grateful to be a part of this conversation. My name is Drew Chaffetz. I'm CEO and co-founder of Love Football. We were co-founded in 2006. We say that we're mission simple, vision vast. We believe that every child deserves a safe place to play sport and have access to a place for passion in their lives, which sport is obviously one of the great mechanisms for. And we achieve that through a community-driven methodology, and that's really what distinguishes the work that we do. We engage communities to be stakeholders, and we say the protagonist in every stage of a community sports space project, so that they have ownership over the process and then that end facility. And it's the ideal is that we're helping create, reclaim, redefine sports spaces as something that is more inclusive, more sustainable, upholds the ideals of the sport for development sector. We've been fortunate to work on 5 continents today across about 14 countries, 54 community-driven sports spaces around the world, and really diversifying the way that we work today. So it really plays into this conversation. I'm looking forward to learning from my co-panelists here as well.
Great. Real, thank you, Drew. And thanks again to all 3 for joining us. We're thrilled to have you. And can't wait to kind of get into the conversation today and see how and learn from all of your insights as well. So thank you guys for joining us. And just before we start, huge thank you as well to our series partners, Laurie Sport for Good Foundation, Street Football World, sportanddev.org, and TEFISA for their continued and amazing support in the series. And I'm sure you'll all have an endless supply of questions to put to the panelists. So please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll do as best we can to get as many of them to the panelists as we go over the next 50 minutes or so. Right, so let's get into it then. So I think just where we start, I think because the last time we kind of convened was September last year, it's the first webinar of 2022. I just want to start by kind of getting a sense of where you guys feel the sector is at the moment, how people are feeling out there. And I think from the report, there was quite a precipitous upward shift in the kind of feelings of confidence and optimism that really seems to have changed over the last 12 months or so. So, Kerry, I'll come to you first with that kind of holistic view. From your position within TEFISA, working with organizations of all shapes and sizes across the sector, is that kind of consistent with what you're seeing and feeling out there in terms of that positivity and optimism around the kind of financial future and sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that we can see from the report that Oaks so eloquently put together that there is this overarching feeling of optimism and hope for the future. And I mean, this is in despite of the collective challenge and also the individual challenges that stakeholders and organizations have been facing over the last 2 years now. I would say that the experience that Tafisa has had with our members and stakeholders is that people are really focusing on dusting themselves off after a really challenging couple of years and driving forward and really focusing on the learnings and the experiences that we've all had in the last couple of years and how we can adapt or how we can continue to adapt and survive in this climate that we've found ourselves in. I'm seeing a lot of not only positivity, but a lot of reflection from within our network and our stakeholders and members. Also, we've all learned a lot about ourselves, about our organization, about the sector as a whole over the last couple of years. I think that the versatility and adaptability of organizations really shone through. And the fact that, I mean, the statistics that came out of the report with, I think it was 90% of organizations that were reporting confidence in their ability to survive is a true testament to the strength and the resilience of individual organizations as well as sector as a whole. I would say that for Tafisa 2020, you know, for the kind of global sport for all movement, it was really about survival. It was about how can we ensure that we're still going to be standing at the end of this year. 2021 was really about that, continuing to be flexible, adaptable, ensuring that we could still meet the demands and achieve our missions and also still meet the expectations of our funders. And now 2022 going forward, I think it's, as I said, dusting ourselves off, new beginnings, and just keep pushing forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kerry. And Drew, from your kind of vantage point as a delivery focused organization, is it, how does it feel for you? How's it been over the last 12 months or so?
Absolutely. I don't know that I have the sectoral purview that Kerry has, and I think she really said it extremely well. I don't know if I have a ton more to add, but you know, resilience is definitely a major theme. You know, we came through such a difficult time for Love Football. Specifically, it was a very challenging time. We had a 80% revenue drop, had to let go 60% of our staff. It was the most difficult professional era in our history. However, you know, looking around at our peers, you know, it seems that everyone is still here, you know, and you know, mainly, and you know, as is the case in any disruption and any challenge, you know, there are inherent opportunities in that, and I think that, you know, it's been really amazing to just look around the sector and see how many groups from the very kind of, you know, community grassroots level to, you know, more sectoral perspective, larger organizations have really transformed. And so, you know, one of the great assets, I think, of our sector, if I can call it this, is passion, and people are just so dedicated. And you know, it should be exciting for all of us that, you know, we've gotten largely through this. You know, not to say we're in a safe zone or anything, but and now, you know, we have a new world ahead, and that's the great opportunity. So just said kind of in a different way perhaps than Kerry, but very much agree.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly feels like the mindset is shifting from survival to, okay, how do we adapt now, and how do we kind of take advantage of the new world, so to speak. And David, kind of as I referenced in the introduction, our report obviously had some really positive stories to tell, and some really good news, and there's some areas still of concern. Kind of what most resonated with you in terms of some of the findings and takeaways from the report?
Yeah, I mean, this is the great thing about being the third person to speak in the panel. It's almost just saying, I agree with everything the panelists have said, and they're 100% right. And I think one of the things is that after the last 2 years, no one can ever argue about the resilience and the adaptability that the sector shows. And I would say that the conversation around how do we move forward has already started. It started a year ago. Immediately, organizations were looking at, okay, we can't implement in person. How do we adapt to digital solutions? Okay, our income streams have been affected. How do we adapt? How do we create new income streams? How do we create new ways of doing fundraising? And I think that's the strength of the sector. I mean, it happened when the economic crisis happened 10, 12 years ago. It happened 2 years ago. So I think that resilience and the fact that we're 2 years later, really positive, broadly speaking, about the future. I think the inequalities in the sector are very much there. We're still very much a European and North American driven sector. And I think we need to ensure that we have better geographical spread and geographical equity in what it is that we're doing. And then I think one of the really interesting things to come from the report is this idea that the organizations themselves recognize that the one thing that's going to help us is communicating and marketing what it is that we do. We need to do better at reaching out to the people who don't know what it is. For too long, we've kind of spoken to ourselves and reaffirmed that we are good. Sport has a role to play in sustainable development. We now need to package that in a way that reaches a new audience. And I think that's the next phase. And I think that's where we need to be heading in the coming years if we are to create better resilience to future crises and not be so dependent on one particular funding stream, but reach out to new partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, I'll definitely be coming to you first with the next question after that comment.
Okay.
And just before we move on, Kerry, I'm keen to just get your take on something that David mentioned actually about that geographical inequity. So again, with your perspective at Tafisa, what's your kind of take on that, and how do we kind of start to address some of that?
Absolutely. No, it was a great point that you've raised, David. And this is something that is a challenge for us within Tafisa. I mean, I spoke about us having our regional bodies, and of course there are continental needs that differ. There's a huge disparity and there's a huge inequality between when we're looking at the global north, the global south, when we think about Tafisa Europe and the opportunities that are there in terms of funding compared to Tafisa in the Americas or Tafisa Africa, for example. This is an ongoing challenge for us as a global organization, I would say, especially because we have such strong partners and we have such successful and really inspirational and passionate organizations, people, programs that are being implemented and developed. When I think about our partner, the African Union Sports Council Region 5, the work that they're doing is tremendous, but a lot of the time, the funding that we're coming across is tailored for European organizations or some of the largest funding sources that Tafisa can tap into and we have access to. It's very restrictive and it's often for organizations that are based in Europe. So it is a challenge that we face. It's something that I wish we had found a solution for as of yet. But I think having conversations like we are today, bringing, panelists together, bringing participants in, and this constant exchange of dialogue and information is one way that we can hopefully collectively come up with solutions for the future.
Great, absolutely. Thanks, Kerry. So I want to move on now to conversation around kind of the main theme of today's discussion around trusted foundations and that perceived over-reliance. So just as a reminder, 56% of organizations we spoke to said they rely on grants from trust foundations and institutions as their primary source of income. And the next highest in that pie chart was corporate partnerships at just 16%. So it shows that it's kind of definitely the overwhelming majority for organizations who have that reliance. David, I promise I'll come to you first, and I'm curious with your perspective on this, obviously from a funding organization as well, just to hear your thoughts and the situation, just to as we're talking about geography, was even more pronounced in Europe as well, with 68% of organizations in Europe reporting that reliance. So what do you think that the reasons behind that is, and what do you see in terms of that being positive, challenges? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't so necessarily surprised about that statistic. nor would I say that was a massive cause for concern. I think the sector, the idea of using sport within sustainable development in a whole is relatively young. And a lot of the growth that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years has been based on grant funding. And that's allowed new ideas to be tested for innovation. It's allowed for organizations to try scaling. It's allowed for a lot of things to happen. And to an extent, it's allowed also for proof of concept. We've developed mechanisms that show the impact of the work that's been done beyond just the inherent value of sport, but the real development work that's been done through these projects. And that's all been funded by grants from trusts and foundations. So I think it's allowed us to build the platform where we are today, and it's allowed us to build a very strong platform. And I think we have now the information we need to reach out to different types of donors and to different audiences. And I think one of the really interesting areas to look at, and I noticed in the report that, for instance, in Asia, 55% of the organizations that responded got a significant amount of their funding from individual donors. And I think that's an area that the sports for development sector, on a very broad sense, hasn't explored, that individual donor area, reaching out to corporates. And then I think grants from foundations and trusts are always going to be a bit of a backbone to funding for the sector. It's the diversity that we need within that pool of donors. We need to reach beyond the traditional, quote unquote, traditional sport foundations that are funding the work for the last 10, 15 years, and reach the organizations that fund more classic, quote unquote, again, traditional development work, and convince them that we are creating the outcomes on the development agenda. And maybe that requires that we shift our focus from being sports-centered to putting the development questions in the front and leading in at the end, or coming at the end with what makes us different to everything else in your portfolio is we do this through sport, which also adds this, but we lead stronger on the development. So I don't necessarily think it's any major concern. We're aware of it now, and I think we can move forward with that really strong funding stream at our back and push forward to new opportunities in front of us.
Absolutely. So it's not about leaving it behind or reducing the income from those areas, but using that as a platform to build that diversification and grow and add to that.
Exactly. And we're already seeing it in the sector. A number of organizations have started to diversify. We are seeing social entrepreneurship models. We're seeing individual donor streams. We're seeing reaching out to corporates. So we're moving there. We just now need to make it a little bit more widespread within the sector.
Absolutely. Great. Drew, yeah, I'd be really keen to hear kind of your perspective in terms of the role trusts and foundations play within your kind of business model and what they have played historically, how that might have changed, and what your plans are within this area moving forward. Like, what do they mean to you at Love Football?
Yeah, we actually haven't had a strong history in support from grants and foundations. In comparison to other revenue streams, our main revenue stream has been sponsorship, mainly from corporations of community sports space projects. So it's a project-based sponsorship model, which has limitations from a variety of perspectives I can go more into, and I alluded to with the challenge that we hit when COVID came. We have had some successful experiences with foundations that have played actually a major role in our growth, both from from that project-based perspective, but also investing institutionally in Love Football played a massive role in our ability to survive COVID. Is support from the Pincus Family Foundation that enabled us to actually harness the opportunity to transform in that moment. I think that for me, and I think that the lens that Love Football tries to look at financial sustainability is we've always taken a social enterprise shared value approach. One of the unique things about sport is that it exists within an ecosystem, a major ecosystem that involves society, business world, these professional sports athletes that are have incredible visibility and in theory are aligned in caring about this game that, the sports that we are helping support as well. And so, if you look at the sector of sport for development within that greater ecosystem, there's a lot of opportunity there. And so we always try to think about things that way. And so for me, part of the reason we haven't put as much focus on foundations is that, part of the thinking in social enterprise is that there's some exchange of value, right? And not to say that foundations or donors, philanthropic funding isn't an exchange. There is an exchange there, but if you can provide different kind of value, strategic value to partners that you work with, that makes it more interesting for them to continue to work with you. I that's been our theory, I would say. And so, for example, with our corporate partners, when we're doing sports-based projects, they are, we often involve their employees. We have build days with the community and employees get involved. That's valuable for a company to provide an opportunity like that to their employee base. It's a tangible sports-based project, so there's a lot of visibility. It's their brand can be on it. They get positive PR associated. It's community building. These are all forms of value that sponsors can get, and so that's part of the reason that our focus and it happened a bit organically and unintentionally, earlier on in our history, but that we evolved toward this more social enterprise of approach and strategy. I think that a last thing to say about grants and foundations is that a lot of these foundations actually are thinking that way too. A lot of them are giving money. They have KPIs strictly to social impact statistics, but they're also trying to grow their brands and build their relationships with their communities and build new partnerships. And so if you as a nonprofit or sport for development organization can offer opportunities like that where they're not just having social impact objectives being met, but also achieving certain goals that enhance their organization strategically, that I think is a long-term, more sustainable mentality. And so that's why we've been a little bit more on that side. And we're actually trying to grow more into the backbone, as David said, of foundations and grant, because there's obviously a tremendous opportunity there. And we've had some, as I mentioned, great experiences. That's a bit my perspective on it.
Great. No, it's fascinating. And obviously we'll move shortly into a bit more of that. How can we diversify and reduce dependency? So it's really interesting to hear your story and your model, which I think will resonate with a lot of people in terms of them trying to kind of agenda something similar. Just pick up on something you said though. I understand the reasons why it's kind of not really been the right kind of backbone for your organization, but have you had any experience where you've tried to connect with donors, institutions and funders where they've not quite been able to find that kind of connection, or is it just not being something you've proactively tried so much in recent times?
And I say this a bit ignorantly, and I welcome anyone to help correct me, but some of our perspective on grants and foundations is that they're expensive, if you will. It takes a lot of effort, extremely competitive, and there's an incredible amount of demands to demonstrate the impact that you have. Not that shouldn't be the case. That's an opportunity, but that's part of the reason that we have steered a little bit away, is we're trying to focus on highest return on investment dollars that allow us to not just invest in sports spaces, but invest in the organization institutionally, make strategic investments, like into our staff, which is usually the most strategic investment you can make. We certainly have to try to answer your question, because I think I went around, but have made lots of efforts to partner with grants and and foundation grant makers and foundations that haven't worked out, but fortunately have had some great wins, and we're working really hard to appeal more to them, by investing in things like monitoring and evaluations to empirically demonstrate our impact. Yeah, we definitely face challenges, but it's remains some degree of, it's a growing focus for us, actually.
Great. Real. Thanks, Drew. David, chance to respond. Funders are expensive.
I stay very quiet because I didn't want to have to. But listen, there's an element of truth to it. There is a process. It is a highly competitive area as well. I mean, from our perspective at the Postcode Foundation, we receive in the range of 800 applications a year and maybe approve 10% of those projects. And now we're talking about the entire portfolio of the foundation. So yes, it is a competitive arena. And I think that's also why the sport for development sector over the last couple of years has heavily invested in impact measurement and impact reporting, because that's kind of what we need to be competitive in that space, especially as we move to the non-traditional sport foundations. And I think the more we move into that space, the more we're going to need to be able to show what is the concrete impact that we're having, whilst also balancing that with what makes us unique, and that is the sport element. We shouldn't lose that, because that is at the core of what we do. But yes, there is an element, but there is also an opportunity there. And I think the report shows that those organizations that have invested in fundraising, that have invested in reporting, they're the ones that are also getting these opportunities. But of course, for organizations who are doing projects, who are looking for funding, it's an absolute balance for them there, but it's an opportunity.
Great. Thanks, David. Kerry, what's your kind of take on all of this? I'm guessing you weren't surprised either about that reliance, and how do you see it? What kind of challenges do you see that poses?
Of course. No, I mean, can I just say the comments that came in from Drew and David there, I fully agree with both of you. You've both made extremely valuable contributions in terms of the kind of grant process. Yeah, the challenges that are being posed to organizations because of this, over-reliance or reliance on the grant funding. I mean, certainly if I speak about TAFISA as an organization or our stakeholders and members, exactly what Drew said, this reliance, it's a bit of a paradox, because it does mean that we can be fairly restricted in what we're able to do with the grant that we achieve. Of course, as my panelists have already said, it's a very time-intensive process coming from both the grant maker and the grantee. A lot of the time when we have the over-reliance, there's that huge risk that if this single stream of funding somehow gets cut, as a lot of us have experienced, especially in the last couple of years, or it's reduced, or even the goalposts are changing slightly, then we have an issue with, in terms of the program development, the program implementation. Also, when we're building our staffing, we're building capacity in order for us to meet the objectives of the programs that we're implementing with this stream of funding. It has this domino effect, which then ultimately impacts the reputation, the credibility of the organization. I think that in terms of, trying to overcome the risks that we're facing with the single stream of funding or the over-reliance on one particular source of funding, I would say there's no quick win here, and there's no easy solution. But Drew mentioned it earlier, the building the capacity within the organization. And I know that this, especially for some stakeholders, some organizations that are operating with practically no human resources, no budget, it's extremely difficult. But I would say that there's opportunity in training an existing staff member, if you're not able to employ a new staff member, to focus on your fundraising activities. I think that fundraising within organizations, it can't be an afterthought, or it can't be a tokenistic effort, because it's just not possible to succeed when it's something that's done half-heartedly, or it's something that's only done as a kind of a checkbox activity. And of course, fundraising activities, they take time, they take effort. We need that leadership buy-in. We need a really clear fundraising strategy, a clear vision, a clear mission. and we do need the investment of time, resources, and we need the commitment in order to really fulfill fundraising activities. I think I got a little bit overexcited in my head and carried away there, Luke, but I hope that I did actually somehow answer the question that you asked.
Yeah, no, most certainly. Yeah, and you're right. And the results of the findings, sorry, of the report certainly bore that out in terms of those who, to David's point, those who invested and prioritized fundraising and were strategic about it, were the ones who found most success and resilience through the challenges of the last couple of years. And that I totally agree as well, Kerry, that it's not a quick win, and this is going to take time. If you're trying to diversify and invest in new areas, it's not an overnight thing. So to that point, Drew, I'd be really keen to kind of hear from your story. And you, as you said, about 80% reduction in revenue recently, and having to kind of let members of the team go, that challenge, and then you obviously having to think, right, we need to rethink, we need a new approach, we need to think about diversification of income. Like, how did you tackle that? And I think that'd be really interesting to lots of people in the audience who don't have big teams, big people who can support on fundraising necessarily. So how do you maximize that relatively limited resource in the area to try and support that diversification mission?
It's a great question. So as I mentioned, a lot of our history was based in corporate sponsors, largely that were funding projects. So individual community sports space projects, and that was making up almost, over 90% of our total revenue. When we knew that, that was a very risky, it's coming from, growing from nothing. So we were very thrilled to, have these funders and be able to work with some of these brands that we have. And that's what explained our growth over the last 5 to 8 years. However, this was a limited single revenue stream, and it was highly risky. And if something like a pandemic were to hit, there will be serious repercussions. And that's what happened for us. And so, as I mentioned, we had a major shock to our organization. Now, in terms of the shift that we went through, mother is a necessity of invention. And one of the things that was interesting is we've now done about over 50 community projects around the world, sports space projects. And during COVID, we couldn't do new sports spaces. But 2019 was our best year ever. We've done a bunch of projects around the world. 2020 was slated to be even stronger. But now we couldn't do a single project. We were brought to a halt. And so in that opportunity, we had time on our hands, which we had never had, because, we were always kind of in this grind, just trying to do more and more every year. And we also, as I mentioned, we were very fortunate to receive funding to not return to our status quo of and challenge our model. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. During when COVID first hit, a lot of our partner communities, where there are sports spaces and there are engaged local community members and networks that we've executed these projects with, we had relationships. And so we were able to do COVID relief efforts through these local groups, and bring, relief efforts to, slums in India and favelas in Rio and, throughout the world. And so the point is we actually shifted our model out of complete necessity. We started doing relief efforts, which was something we'd never done, and bringing new value to our global network of sports spaces. And all of a sudden we started to view our network that way, as a network, which we hadn't quite done before. And we realized we had this asset, all these communities that we have relationships with and sports spaces, and started to create what we call activations. And that's, we've always had a form of this because we have, we partner with a lot of the great organizations around the sector. I haven't really been watching comments, I'm sorry, but I saw Magic Bus, for example. We've worked with Magic Bus in India, and they implement their programs on our sports spaces long term. We have a partnership model, but in this circumstance, we have a new form of activations with corporate and funders that can bring workshops and all types of different new opportunities to our global network. And we're doing that now. And it was quoted actually in the state report, State of the Sector, but currently almost 50% of our total revenue now comes from new revenue streams that we didn't even have in 2019. And I jumped around there. I apologize. I hope you all recall me a little bit, but that's been a major transformation for us.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating kind of case study for people who I'm sure have faced similar challenges. I'm really sorry to the audience. It's been 40 minutes and I haven't asked one of your questions yet, so I'm going to do that and correct that now. A question for you, David. So is there a problem with the agreement or kind of consensus on the definition or description of sport for development? And does this have implications on the sector's ability to secure income from non-sports funders and donors? Do you think there's a challenge with that kind of consensus and what this actually means, and therefore connecting with the right donors?
I mean, should we extend the length of this webinar for another hour? I mean, now we're really getting into it. I would say there's a bit of both to that, yes and no. I think we grew on the niche area that we are, sport for development, and sport was the center of what we did. It was the core of what we did. It's how we engage with communities. It's how we, to use the words of a colleague of mine, it's a Trojan horse to be able to enter communities and then to start having some of these conversations that maybe are too quick to have immediately on day one. And I think that is what makes it so unique as a tool for being able to create a platform for these conversations. But I think we sometimes tend to overstate the impact of sport. We need to be realistic about the limitations of sport, and also the fact that not everyone is on board with the idea that sport is a valuable tool for development or can be a tool for development. We also need to recognize that it can have negative consequences, and that there are people there who question, for instance, the idea that sport could be used within gender equality when sport also upholds the norms that are gender norms within society. So I think we need to retain that niche area. This is how we do it. This is our vehicle, but we need to shift focus to what it is that is our development outcomes. And I think someone in the chat said about it that we need to collect the data. We need to be reporting on what it is that the impact and the outcomes is, because that is what future potential donors are looking for. This conversation around sport for development, development through sport, this has been around since the dawn of time for this sector, and I don't think it's one that we're going to fix. I think, though, when we're talking about ourselves as a sector, I would like us to lead with the development aspect and then building upon a strong core of sport. I think that is something that will benefit us in the future as we move forward.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely agree. Thanks, David. Kerry, I mean, great to get your view on that. You know, your organisation is Sport for All, so there's another component. Yeah.
Well, I would say, David, we need more than an hour. Because of course, you know, Tafisa, we speak about sport for all, and we use the term sport for all in terms of grassroots sport, in terms of opportunities for each and every person to undertake any type of physical activity, etc. Yes, this is a long historical debate in and out of academia, but I would say that it is something that we have discussed at length within our own Tafisa organization, both within the office and with the board, with how are we presenting ourselves? Because actually, when we first kind of re-kicked off our own fundraising strategy in 2019, the very first thing we did before mapping potential sources of income was looking at our organization, looking at our branding, looking at our visibility, looking at how we're presenting ourselves to potential funders to see if it was clear that the work, what we are doing, and to see that, you know, we can't expect the fundraising sphere to adapt to how we're presenting ourselves. So we had to make sure we were speaking in a language that was actually going to be understood. And in our specific case, we have to speak in a language that's understood globally. So I fully agree with what David said, that of course, you know, we are focusing on sport. We're representing sports organizations in whatever capacity it is, but really we're trying to look at the end result here and what is it that we're achieving through increasing opportunities for sport and physical activity. And I think this is when we really widen fundraising opportunities for us as well, because I think one or maybe both of my fellow panelists mentioned this earlier, that we have this reliance, or we have this kind of mindset of only talking amongst ourselves, and we're all aware of the value of sport. We all know the power behind sport, but it's other sectors that we should be talking to, and it's other sectors that we should be working with. And I think this is one learning that I've had with Tafisa's own strategy in the last couple of years, that we shouldn't only be looking within our own sector either. We shouldn't be afraid to work with other sectors. And this is when we're really looking beyond this terminology that we're using, or we're looking beyond sport, because again, I fully agree with what David said, that there are some contradictions. So we need to be focusing more on the wider impact and the kind of larger consequences that that are being caused as an impact of the use of sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually links into another audience question. And I totally agree, Kerry. And there's been a lot of talk about trusted foundations, and we talk about other sectors, kind of general thought, it's like corporates, private sector, and other parts of the third sector. But what about kind of the public sector and governments? What role do you think there's an opportunity there to kind of increase the kind of partnership and support from governments across the world? And again, I know, Kerry, from your perspective at Tafisa, that there's a lot of government engagement as well. So what's your kind of view on that? And is there a room for growth within that space as well?
Absolutely. I think that this is something that is huge scope when it comes to public funding, government funding, especially when we do look at the long-term impact of undertaking sport and physical activity opportunities. When we look at, you know, the impact it has, and it's when we think about the departments within the government that may be interested in funding, it's not only looking at health, we're looking at culture, we're looking at development, sustainability. There's so many opportunities there. And I think that from the relationships that Tafisa that we have with our government here in Germany, for example, or that our members, when they have that buy-in from their government, when they have the support from the ministry, or even at the local level, municipality, you can see the impact that it has on the success of the organization. And of course, when no one knows the citizens of a country or a community better than the governance structure at the top. So I think that it's a very successful, we constantly see very successful projects that are coming out of having that government buy-in and government funding. And a lot of the time, I will say, it can be a complicated process. You know, Tafisa, we do try, when possible, if we have a relationship with a government in a particular country, we do try and connect them with the sport organizations that are existing there, because I think that one of the challenges that we see across our network, across our stakeholders, is a lack of awareness, or sometimes it's a lack of confidence in making that initial step or knowing who to talk to. So this is something that Tafisa does try to manage with the introduction, or the kind of awareness raising, the communication, etc. But definitely a lot of potential to tap into.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Kerry. David, just another audience question, from the funder perspective again. just what are the most important things that organizations should bear in mind when they're putting forward proposals beyond the words on the page? What are the most important things you'd look at in terms of an organization being fundable, so to speak, or low risk as a potential organization to whom you might issue a grant? Like, what are the most important kind of non-project related, if that's the best way to describe it, factors to consider?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's difficult to speak. I mean, we talk about funders as if it's a blanket term for a very complex ecosystem. I represent one grant making organization. I can't speak to what others look at, but I mean, when you are looking at what we look at, when you are a sport-based organization that is implementing community activities, the sport element is almost taken for granted. Like, we understand that creates a platform. There doesn't need to be a vast amount of detail of how that part looks. What we're interested in is, what is this leading to? What are you creating in terms of your project, and what is that leading to an impact? And I think it's like anything else. It's like if you go to a corporation, it's like you go to any partner, you need to also identify, how can I speak the language that this organization speaks? How can I build a partnership here? What is it that they funded in the past? Do the research, and it takes time. I agree with that. At the foundation, we have tried to make it the first step as easy as possible for organizations to apply for us. So we have essentially asked for like a 3-page concept note as a first step, so that organizations aren't putting together 10, 15-page documents, sending it in, and then getting a response months later. But I think, look at what the organization funds to begin with. Are they funding similar things? How are they speaking? What language are they using? Look at kind of reports that maybe they're showing on their social media. What's being said in those? What is the organization looking to fund? And how can your organization complement what it is that's in their portfolio? And how can you sell in your concept to them? I think that's a very simple, probably very obvious starting point. But I also feel like when you're in that grind of looking for funding, it's a step that you don't take, because you just want to get the application in. It's almost throw 100 darts at a board and hope that something sticks, instead of really sitting down and going, okay, who is this organization? What is it they fund? What are they looking to fund? What is it that's on their website? And how can I speak the language they're speaking, so that I have a better chance of kind of being heard through the noise? Because, as I said, 800 applications in a year, and that's one foundation, and other foundations probably have more than that. And then again, as an organization, it comes back to, and as a sector, it comes back to how we communicate about ourselves. And I think that's also in the report, that we need to mobilize as a sector. We need to have a collaborative approach so that we can access these different fundings. There might be a space that we're missing that used to be filled by the UN OSDP, and having that voice that spoke to the value of sport at the top level. And maybe we need to have a conversation. Do we need to create a forum like that again, where we can have these collaborative conversations, so that on a sector level, we're advocating for more resources to the sector, and on an individual organizational level, they're able to better identify the right partner to fund, to apply to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. I'm really conscious of time, and Drew, I just wanted to ask you again, back to that diversification point, and obviously your success with engaging like corporate partners. What kind of things have you found that have most resonated and been of most value when having those conversations, in terms of what Love Football's been able to offer? What have they valued within those partnerships?
I think it's really a spectrum. To David's point earlier about, sport for development versus development through sport. Some organizations are some companies or funders are looking for, marketing value and are more on that side of the conversation. Like, we worked with Coca-Cola for a number of years with their Copa Coca-Cola tournament. It's a marketing initiative. It's not, under corporate social responsibility or their foundation. And then on the other side of the equation, we've worked with, UEFA Foundation, for example, to do projects around the world, and their goals are much more around, social impact, impact. So it really depends. And I think what David was saying about, looking at the entity itself, what are their priorities, what is their brand about, what are they already doing that you can kind of fit into, is, I think, the key questions to ask. For us, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing something very tangible and visible. Right? We're helping a community, come together and create a place for their kids to play. And so that, and we really view these sports spaces as platforms for a diversity of things, from social enterprise to obviously social impact. And just to be clear, when we're creating marketing value for our partners, we're still a social mission organization. That's first for us. So we're always making sure that we're working in communities that, we believe we can be successful and reach our social objectives. But at the same time, can you create value for these partners? So as I mentioned, corporate volunteerism is a big one. PR is a big one. I think a big asset that's untapped in our sector is storytelling. And it's not easy to do. It's something we've worked, at least for us, we've worked for a long time to try to do stories well. But these are things that brands care a lot about. And if you can, create that kind of value for them and communicate these types of opportunities, there's a better shot that you'll have a chance to work together.
Brilliant. Thanks, Drew. And I can't believe it. We're almost out of time. So I just want to give you all a chance to kind of provide us with your kind of closing thoughts, closing sentiments, kind of that call to arms message to the people watching. Gary, I'll start with you.
I'm very conscious of the time, so I will be very quick. I just want to first of all say a huge thank you to Luke and the team at Oaks for bringing us together for these much needed conversations and for providing the evidence-based feedback on the state of the sector, which is really positioning us well in moving forward. Great kickoff to the webinar. Really excited about the rest of the series. To Drew and David, it's been a pleasure sharing this space with you for the last hour. To the participants, really thank you for joining. I would just like to say that, of course, with the pandemic, we're not out of the woods yet, but I think that we've got a lot of reason to feel very hopeful for this year and the years to come. And I think this is the time for organizations to really, keep reflecting, reevaluating. Let's focus on our strengths moving forward. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of taking that initial risk. And just, huge thank you once again to Luke and Oaks for shining a light on this much needed subject. And I look forward to the rest of the webinars in the series. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerry. David.
Yeah, I'm going to second everything that Kerry said. I've been looking for the emojis in Zoom where you can clap and thumbs up and out, because there's been so much great stuff said here. And I also particularly, Drew, what you said about storytelling, I think that is absolutely, we talk a lot about impact and very data driven, but storytelling is going to be and it's right within our comfort zone as a sector. We have those phenomenal stories and we should be using those more, and it'll help us with the individual donors. And I think these kind of areas, it's over 100 people here participating. And if there's one thing that is true about this sector, above and beyond the resilience, it's that we're incredibly collaborative and we want to help one another. So I think if you've seen someone speaking today, if you see someone speaking in future webinars, or you see someone speaking in the crowd, reach out to them. They will most likely be happy to get in touch. I think this sector is one of the strengths. We are a team. Even though we compete for different resources, but we want to help each other because we see it's in the best interest of the sector. So based on what we've come through in the last 2 years, I'm really hopeful about where we're headed. And I think we're taking a lot of lessons into the future with us.
Well, thanks, David. Drew.
Luke, Rahul, Tilly, Kerry, and David, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Honored to be a part of this conversation and learn from everyone. I think I want to just echo David there. I think one of the great assets that we have is each other. We really, have an opportunity to provide something incredible together. A common goal, I think, is a great example of that. There's a lot of great examples of how we can view this as an ecosystem, and our sector together as a huge part of that ecosystem that has a ton to offer. I think we're just beginning that story. So, thank you so much for this opportunity again. It's great to see it.
Thanks, Drew. A fantastic way to end. Really appreciate all of that. I'll just try. I've been making notes as we go to try and distill some kind of summary from so much that's been said. I'll do my best. So just a few of the notes that I kind of thought were really kind of resonating. So overall, it's clear the sector is starting to shift from a mindset of survival to revival. I think that was something that came through. Clearly, the over reliance on grants could be a problem, but it's only a problem if we don't use it as an opportunity to diversify and really maximize that platform that it gives us to build from. You know, the sector is relatively young, and grants have enabled us to build a platform and proof of concept that we can now leverage to secure investment from elsewhere. We need to try and shift the focus and attention away from sport onto the development outcomes and really put that at the forefront of the conversation. And that conversation needs to evolve beyond just talking to ourselves, which we're great at doing as a sector, and actually starting to engage that really diversified audiences to make sure we're really maximizing the opportunities across so many different sectors and environments. So we're running over already, so please, I hope everyone would join me kind of virtually in saying a huge thank you to our panelists for being here with us today. We so appreciate you giving us the time and all of your insights and perspectives. It's been so enlightening, and obviously we're immeasurably grateful for your support and contributions today. Thank you to you as well, the audience. Sorry, again, I didn't get to as many questions I should have, got carried away with the conversation. But yeah, we really appreciate all of the contributions and questions. Anything that we didn't cover today, but we'll obviously try and reach out in terms of our follow-up to try and help answer any questions that you did have that we didn't get to. Recording today's session, and will be coming out over the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that if anybody didn't catch the full session and wants to share with colleagues. And then keep your eyes peeled as well on the comms around the next webinar in the series, which will be dropping in, I think, mid-June in terms of when we'll be delivering the next one. Thank you again to everybody who joined. A huge thank you to the panelists, and see you all soon. Goodbye.